I'm Paul from Engaging Networks. My last job, I was a director of fundraising. And mobilisation, I think, offers a great way for charities not just to acquire new donors, but to acquire a supporter base, which is heavily engaged with the charity's cause, is likely to give, and I think he's likely to give for a long time as well. So I think it really speaks to a lot of the things that made me passionate about working at a charity, and how to kind of make those charities successful. And I'm pleased to introduce Stephen. So over to you.
Hi everyone, I'm Stephen O'Shea. I'm the Global Head of Digital Fundraising at Animals Asia.
Thank you. So what is mobilisation? So I think if you work at a charity, you'll be doing a lot of this anyway. It's the action of organising and encouraging a group of people to take collective action in pursuit of a particular objective. And that's largely what we're going to be talking about today. It's taking that and applying it practically to your audience, and it encourages you to grow an audience and to engage that audience more deeply. As with anything at work, it starts with your strategy. And I think that it kind of plugs into something you should all have if you're working for a charity. So what's your charity's purpose? What's your goal? And then what change is needed to help you achieve that purpose and that goal? And it kind of finishes with how can people help you? And I think that's something that it should run through a charity strategy in terms of engaging an audience and in terms of growing your audience, but it's not often something that does, and it's often something charities need to work on. The answers that you get from that question should help you build an approach that will attract people who have similar values to your charity and a similar view of the world. So it makes it easier to engage them with relevant content and with the things that will make them passionate, will make them engage, and will make them take action on your behalf. And working towards a mobilisation model requires organisations to work as one. And that might sound really obvious, but I think it's something that charities are often quite bad at. I've worked at a lot of charities that are quite siloed. And this approach needs charities to come together and for teams to work together and to break down those silos and understand that nobody owns a supporter. So Paul Gregorio called a defined mobilisation in this way in a report that we wrote with him last year. Practically, when we see the mobilisation model applied kind of within the charity sector, we see charities going out and acquiring people using hand-raising actions. So that's often an advocacy action or something that just indicates that somebody is connected to a cause and feels passionate enough about it to take an action. And then they move through a journey to get them to engage more deeply. So that can be encouraging them to donate, to take other actions, and to support charities in other ways. And the power of the model, regardless of who I speak to who works through a mobilisation model, they've all experienced the same thing. They grow a very large list of engaged supporters that they're then able to go and communicate with. And you'll hear from Stephen in a moment about kind of the kind of growth in audience volume that you can achieve by working in this way. It can help generate fundraising income. And that's obviously a really important part of what charities try to do. But it can also help you deliver more successful campaigns to a much wider audience. And that's something that maybe people don't talk enough about when they're talking about this kind of approach. So to give you a bit of an outline of work that's been going on Animals Asia, I'll hand over to Stephen.
Cool, thanks Paul. So just a bit of context on Animals Asia. We are an animal welfare organisation that works across Asia, predominantly in Vietnam and China, and we're striving to end bare-bow farming and generally improve the welfare of animals in Asia. We used a mobilisation model to grow our database and our fundraising income. When we started this journey, our only channel for acquisition was paid social ads, and that was bringing in a decent chunk of donors, but there was a lot of risk in that channel, and we needed to kind of spread that and diversify. So we looked at other ways to engage our audience, and we decided on mobilisation and lead generation. We had to work across our fundraising teams and our programs and advocacy teams to create these goals and achieve them. So to begin with, we developed maybe sort of 3 or 4 propositions and tested them very quickly. And I think that's a real key in this. You need to have a couple before you're ready to kind of roll out and see which one delivers the lowest cost per lead. Our hand raisers were very much aimed at encouraging the positive decisions that the governments and actors that we work with were taking. So rather than doing a petition where you were trying to achieve change or call out someone, it was actually more of a positive hand raiser. We called it petition with a small p. So we realized that kind of not everyone is going to have the ability to petition a government or an organization, but there are other ways in. There are different ways that your audiences can take action, feel good about what they're doing for you, and build that engagement. We developed a lot of creative to launch, and that's really key as well for this. You need to have quite a lot of creative ready to go because paid social ads really do burn through the creative. Facebook's a content-hungry beast, so to have that creative in the bank ready to go before you launch is totally key. And the other thing that we did was we developed a 5-week onboarding journey, which was basically an automated email journey. It had a mixture of engagement, actions, surprise and delight, but also lots of fundraising asks peppered in throughout as well. And then the final part of this journey was conversion to telemarketing. So we ran that in our English-speaking markets in the US, Australia, and the UK, supplying lead data to telemarketing agencies for them to call for conversion. So yeah, as I mentioned, what we found is that you need lots of content to run this type of activity. I don't want that to put people off. It just requires a bit of planning. And it doesn't even have to be sort of super kind of meticulously planned. It just chuck loads of content out there, see what happens. You'll get the feedback very quickly from paid social by looking at your metrics. Obviously, use as much video and imagery as you possibly can. You'll know which kind of imagery and which images work for you, which resonates with your audiences. So go with your gut, chuck stuff out there and see what comes back. And most importantly, and I can't stress this enough, as soon as people have taken that action, once they've signed up, signed your petition, done their hand raiser, take them to a page for donating, because we found about 25% of people, once they'd done the action, went on to donate. And the income from those donations pretty much meant the leads paid for themselves. We were running at an immediate ROI of about 1 or sort of 0.8, 0.9 for the majority of the campaign. And the other thing that really helps, we were lucky enough to have someone like Ricky come on board and do an ad for us. And it really helped with that social proofing to get someone, a thought leader or someone that's associated with your charity, to endorse the action and get other people to do it. So if you have celebs that are willing to go on and do that stuff for you, I'd really recommend engaging those people. It's also a really good way of engaging celebrities in general. It's a really soft thing that they can do for you. So yeah, testing's key. Develop your propositions to begin with and chuck them out there, see what happens. You'll find out pretty soon which one's delivering a really good cost per lead, and then you can then roll that out and start to put a bit of budget behind it. Doesn't have to be a petition. It can be a hand raiser. Quizzes and surveys work really well. What you're seeing on the screen there is a proposition that we never actually rolled out. It was a which bear are you quiz. And that delivered a really good cost per lead, but we didn't end up using it because we had 2 other propositions that worked much better in terms of the cost per lead. So yeah, just find what works for you and your organization and your audience. And then the other thing I would say is this stuff is a real long game. So I mentioned about the immediate ROI, but we're still getting people that took that action 18 months ago, have done nothing for us, and they're now 18 months later are giving their first gift. So these people, keep communicating with them, keep sending them stuff. They will convert over the long term. They may not just be ready to give at that time. But at some point, your proposition is going to get tired, and those metrics, those ROIs will really kind of start to suffer, and you'll just get fatigue on your proposition. So don't be afraid to call it. Keep track of your return on investment, and when it gets to a level that's unacceptable for you and your fundraising team and your organization, press stop and learn from it, and then develop some new ones, and then go again. Build lead generation into your acquisition plans. So look at your metrics, look at your cost per acquisitions, your ROIs, build all that in. And we're on pretty much now a near constant cycle of developing new propositions and testing it, ready for when the next one is ready to go. So what you're seeing on the screen there is a petition that we launched maybe about 3 weeks ago to end the dog meat trade in Vietnam, which is really, really doing well. So yeah, we've got lots of stuff in the pipeline, and I think that's the way to do it, is to keep stuff in the pipeline for testing. So the results, probably what you're all really interested in. In the UK, we had a 6-figure database growth, converting large numbers of donors into regular giving and cash. In the US, that number is closer to 7 figures. The data quality wasn't as good in the US as the UK, but it was a massive increase in our database and gave us a huge audience to target. In the UK, we were getting around £1 per email address and £1 for £2 for phone numbers. By the end of the campaign, they were probably more at sort of double those levels, and that was when we chose to kind of pull the plug and switch it off. But as I mentioned, the activity on Facebook, taking people onto that donation page immediately after the action, generated enough upfront income that those leads basically pay for themselves. And then with all the telemarketing costs and the media costs and creative costs, our year one ROI was 1.6 in the UK. So I think that's me. I'll hand back over to Paul.
Thanks for that. So I mentioned earlier that we put a report together last year looking at kind of public attitudes, especially targeting kind of this mobilisation approach and kind of campaigning and fundraising in the UK. And there's some stats that I thought were interesting that I'd share with you that I think really underscore kind of the power of this type of action and the value add that you can get out of some of this work. So I think in terms of audience size, you're looking at nearly 30% of the UK population having taken a campaigning action with a charity. And so it gives you an idea of the potential volume of people that you can engage at your charities with kind of campaigning asks, even if they're not those kind of overt campaigns that you see used so successfully by charities like Refuge. About 40% of people who took those actions then shared them with their networks online. So whenever you do launch a campaigning action, make sure you've got social sharing buttons set up at the end of it, because you can grow your audience hugely through people's personal networks at no cost. And then 70% of people consider themselves to support 2 or more charities. And I think that speaks to the fact this doesn't just have to, target people for whom you might be somebody's charity of choice. People will support multiple causes. They'll go out and they'll look and engage with things that they're passionate about. It doesn't just have to be a single issue. Now, the thing I often found in my old job was that there were a couple of things that made launching these kind of actions a little bit difficult, and they were often the teams that were involved. So quite often we'd hear from our colleagues in the campaigns team that they didn't want to kind of harm their campaigning audience by asking them for money. And so we wouldn't send fundraising asks to campaigns audiences. And sometimes my fundraisers would come back and say, we don't want to kind of dilute our fundraising asks by putting campaigning messages in front of donors. And so I thought this was a really, really key stat. So 92% of people who took a campaign action had also supported a charity through an individual giving action. So it shows that probably almost everybody on your campaigns list is expecting to be asked for money, and they're not going to be put off supporting your charity if you do ask them for that money. On the other side, about 25% of people who gave through individual giving also took campaign actions. So for any fundraisers in the room, it's a really, really good ask to put in front of your donor audience. I used to refer to them as palate cleansing asks, because you're not asking people for money, you're asking them to engage in other ways and to lend their voice to your charity instead of just going out to them and asking for money. So if you only take one message away, take that kind of message away, that people are taking a campaigning action are warm to a fundraising ask. So in our report, we've put together a checklist of things that you can do within your charity to work in this way. And I think there's a few kind of key take-home messages that allow you to launch successful actions. So get buy-in from across your organisation. It's really important to break down those silos and to work with your colleagues as kind of one team. I think one of the best examples I've seen at this is from the Children's Society, where they've structured their charity to look more along the lines of having an attraction team and a retention team, rather than having these kind of different silos that quite often exist in more traditionally structured organisations. I think developing and planning a budget with some contingency, and even if that contingency is just spent on more content, it's money very well spent. Invest in training, so it'll involve changes in the way that you work. You might adopt kind of agile approaches, you might change the systems and platforms that you're working with. So make sure that you take staff with you. Pick the right platform. So I think automation and also reporting are really, really vital in this. You need to know what's working, and you need to be able to keep track of what's going on with your audience, what the conversion rate's like. Think about data. So get your data flows set up from the get-go. Half of this is about giving your supporters a great experience when they engage with you. And if you've got data being transferred between systems and it takes days or weeks to get the data moved around and people put onto proper communication journeys, that's a real break in somebody's supporter experience. Develop lots of content, and I think we've talked about that quite a lot. And use a mix of actions to attract people. So don't just go out and try to put fundraising actions in front of people after they've come and signed up. Daisy chain your actions. So I think Stephen touched on this, but one of the really important things is to have a fundraising ask straight after the campaigning ask. Go to people when they're in that moment where they feel like they've done something, where they feel empowered, and treat people's time, money, and voice equally throughout the journey. I think one of the worst things a charity can do is to just invest in stewarding their donor audience. They need to be thinking about their audience more holistically than that. They need to give the value that a campaigner, a volunteer deserves to kind of stewarding people through that journey. So I think tomorrow we're going to have some copies of our mobilisation report around the venue for people to pick up. So thank you for listening. Do help yourself tomorrow. And if anyone has any questions, now's the time.
Cool. Can everyone hear me? Okay. So we do have a couple of questions. First one, how did you capture phone numbers and telephone consent from people you could only follow up with TM?
So we just used an Engaging Networks page with the phone number and a phone number field and the right privacy wording, basically. And once we had that opt-in, we were sure that we could telemarket and send that data to an agency, and off we went. It was really that simple. In the same way that when you're capturing phone numbers and phone details on a donation form, it's exactly the same process for lead generation.
Another question for you, Stephen. Was there any negative impact from the message from Ricky Garabias? Because apparently he's not liked.
He's a bit Marmite. You either love him or you hate him. We found, quite depressingly, I guess for us, that he is by far and away our biggest draw for response. He outperforms any bear on an ad. He outperforms our CEO on an ad. He's the main event. So we do get some negative comments, but overwhelmingly it's positive, and all of his ads have just achieved. The ROI on his ads are insane. So yeah, because he's such an animal welfare advocate and an animal welfare person, he really resonates with that audience. And so when he's saying something, then like sheep, they all follow.
When you ask for a donation after taking action, do you remove the share buttons and only ask for a donation?
Sorry, could you repeat that?
So when you do ask for a donation after taking action, do you remove the share buttons and only ask for a donation?
No, we would keep the share buttons at every point in that journey just to give people that option. So we don't remove them once they've taken a donation. If they want to share after they've donated, it will be to say that they've donated rather than do the action. So yeah, it's kind of specific to the action that they've taken. Yeah.
What advice would you give to smaller charities with less resource and budget on implementing a mobilization model?
So I'd say that you don't need a huge amount of budget to test something. Resource and time are going to be your main kind of challenges with this, I think, and getting that organizational buy-in. You could probably test a relatively modest budget of, I don't know, £50 to £100 spend a day on Facebook, just to see how that works. Your targeting is going to be really important, so make sure you know your audience. Facebook will optimize to the most responsive audiences to begin with, so you will see your best results at the start of the campaign. It will always tail off. And yeah, just test a few things and earmark, depending on how much resource and budget you have, put a little bit of money aside and see how it works. You'll find that you'll probably get some really strong results if you've never done any of this activity before on Facebook.
I think there's something around, this is a way you can stop being a small charity, essentially. I think Refuge is such a powerful case study. When they took this approach 3 years ago, there were 3,000 people on their email database. Today, they've got 200,000 active supporters on their email database. So it's a way of getting that exponential growth that can really catapult a charity from small to mid-sized or large.
Yeah, and I would also add, if you're if you're working at a charity where the cause is quite a difficult sell, this is a really good way of getting people on board. Talking about issues and things that are important to people, but maybe they're not ready to donate. This is a really good way of engaging those audiences without kind of investing too much money. It's a really good way of getting people engaged with your cause.
Another question about Ricky. How did you first engage with him, and what was your first touch point?
So we're very lucky. Our CEO, Jill Robinson, is a bit of a rock star in the animal welfare world. And she has a few friends, and her contact is an actor called Peter Egan, who you may know. He's been in a few things. And so he has a line into Ricky, and Peter set up the meeting, and then introduced Ricky to Jill. He has a bear in China called Derek that he's named after one of his TV shows. So we're very lucky in that the connections that we have. So using people's networks to get to people that are interested in your cause and what you're doing.
Did you have any challenges with conversion rates on Facebook?
No, the conversion rates were really good. As I say, 25% of the people that took the action went on to give a donation. We even got some regular givers straight from cold that did the action straight to RG. So yeah, no problems at all with the conversion rates. And the actual hardest bit was probably the TM stuff. It took a bit of work with the phone agency to kind of get the scripts right and look at the data and see which audiences were converting best. That was probably the bigger challenge than Facebook, I would say.
So we've got a question in the
Question
audience.
at the back there, yeah.
This might be a bit of a challenging question. I guess it also goes out to Cat's protection earlier, which I guess is that you guys really have a bonus in basically being able to mobilise people's horror at things
Yeah.
without a lot of moral ambiguity or
Yeah.
kind of judgments, apart from the fact you don't want to overly mobilise people's horror in a way that I guess makes them xenophobic. I guess could be the only risk of what you're doing.
Yeah.
I just wonder if you have got any advice for people who work on not more challenging, in some ways possibly less challenging topics. Like, is this stuff as applicable? Is that, getting cold audiences to suddenly care about the fact that animals are being tortured? Is there something that, I don't know, I just wonder if sometimes that's just like straightforward like in people's brains, I think.
Yeah.
Do you have any thoughts or reflections on how that might relate to like the democracy team who were presenting earlier, and like things that are more nuanced and that it's much harder to get that really strong discussed response from?
Yeah, totally. There's ways in for every single organisation, I would say, and it doesn't have to be with petitions or things like that. You could do values-based statements like, this is wrong and I disagree with it. You can do quizzes and surveys. There's all sorts of different ways. It's not just about taking an action, which in the sort of traditional mobilisation campaigning sense, it's about selling something or creating something that resonates with the audience in lots of different ways and getting them to engage in that. So it doesn't necessarily have to be this petition campaigning thing is what I would say. Does that answer your query? Yeah.
I think Animals Asia as well is quite an interesting case study in that the action that we spent most of the time talking about today was a very positive action, because they have to work with governments who you can't campaign to in a way we would traditionally campaign to the UK in the UK or US or a Western nation, and the way that they approached it I think was quite clever. They looked at how they could celebrate positive forward movement and engage people in that in a way that wasn't antagonistic, and I think that. One thing that I always found working at the charities used to get all these wins that they never told their audiences about, and the audience engage really, really well when there's a win, when something positive happens. So think about where you achieve something, where you create positive change, and then use that as a way of mobilising your audience.
Yeah, just to add as a kind of a tangible example of that, the first petition that we ran was literally just saying thank you to the Vietnamese government for making bear bar farming illegal. That was it. I say thanks. That was all it took. So it's just flipping that on its head and making it a positive thing rather than a sort of negative, shouty thing. Yeah.
We have time for just one more question, and the last question is, how much time do you dedicate to reactionary hand raisers based on what's currently in the news versus proactive campaigns?
It's very difficult to be reactionary with a campaign like this because it just requires so much planning. It's tricky. We've never done it. We've always, thought about it, planned it, took the time to do the creative and the content, chuck the pages up. So if you're agile enough to be able to do that, then absolutely, anything that's relevant and is now is always going to do better than something that takes time to plan. So if you're able to and agile enough, then certainly do it. But we were never able to do that. We always took sort of 3 to 4 months lead time and planning.
I think a great case study in that is Refuge. If you go and read about what they've been doing, they are very responsive, and they do react to current events in almost real time. And they've got a really interesting kind of model for how they do that, and it's incredibly effective for them when they do it at the right moment.
Thank you again, Stephen and Paul.